It's all about perspective. Notre Dame with the ninth ranked class in college football, according to 247 Sports. But again, about perspective. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We got the very best here to talk about it. Talking Notre Dame football with, of course, Brian Driscoll. Catch his get together, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as well on Irish Breakdown. They're going to do a number of angles to this National Signing Day over the next few days. But catch what Brian and his staff put together yesterday. Brian, we appreciate you being here first and foremost. But secondly, would love for you to let everyone know what you and the guys at Irish Breakdown put together with the recruits and the families and so forth.
Well, yesterday's show was kind of we decided to take a bit of a different angle this year. Instead of immediately breaking down the class and everybody that signed and making it kind of a news and analysis show, we wanted to kind of let people get a glimpse of this class as people. And so we had parents on of different prospects. We had recruits on, just kind of talking. We had a couple times we had a parent and a recruit. So Christian Gray and his mom joined us together. Cooper Flanagan was there with his older brother, with his mom. His dad was kind of lurking in the background. We could see him in view. And then we ended the show with Braylon James and his dad, because the goal is kind of like, look, we spend all year breaking these kids down. They're filmed. We grade them. We talk about them. We talk about the fit. We talk about all the latest news with them. But what people don't get a chance to see is to get to know these kids the way that we do, So yesterday, Notre Dame fans got the chance to see that Christian Gray is not only a really talented cornerback on film and a guy that could be a really good football player, but he's silly. He's a fun-loving, lighthearted kid that has a great relationship with his mother. We had them both on, and you got a chance to see that. Kid like Sam Pendleton's a really bright, thoughtful kid. All you know about him right now is he's physical and mauls people on the football field. We got a chance to show you a different side of him. He also has a twin sister who was being recruited to play Division I basketball, and what that process was like for the family to have both of them going through the recruiting process together. So it was a lot of fun, and we really wanted to kind of take a different angle to it. Now today, we'll get back to doing what we do, which is breaking down film and grading the class and getting to the analysis. But we wanted yesterday's show to be different, and it was long, but it was a lot of fun, and I think we accomplished our goal of trying to let Notre Dame fans get a little bit of a different glimpse into who these kids are beyond just what they can do with the helmet on.
Absolutely. This is what sports content can be at its best. When I think about what I like to view, because beyond the games anymore, I have really sized my viewing down to I just want to watch football rather than watch these ridiculous pregame and postgame and halftime shows. But when you can entertain me and provide the insight, the information, the analysis that is meaningful, not cliched, not obvious, that is most of the analysis out there, that is the really good stuff. I'm looking for the information, the analysis, but if you can add on, really good narratives and storylines and get to know the people and have it be entertaining like that, that's phenomenal. So everybody,
that's why the only thing I will watch on game day is Tom Rinaldi. And now I think he's at Fox now, right? Like I'll literally record it, fast forward to his segment, watch that, and then turn the rest off. And because you get that backstory, that unique look at a kid that we wouldn't have otherwise got.
So we will go the breakdown portion of this, of course, with this Notre Dame class. And I said what I said off the top because this was the number one class for a large portion of the offseason. So if you would have told a lot of people out there as Notre Dame fans, you've got the ninth ranked class in the country, said that prior to achieving that number one ranking, that would have been fine. That would have been good. We can work with that. We can do it. But when you arrive at that place from the number one ranking, are you getting a lot of backlash from Notre Dame supporters concerning where this class landed?
Some are. I mean, look, there's always going to be people that just obsess over rankings. Right. And that's just the reality of it. Alabama's ranked number one all the time and their class is ranked number one. And the comment that we always have is like, but go follow where these kids were ranked before Alabama went after them or landed them. They weren't always there. Right. Some of these kids skyrocket after Bama takes them. So was it Bama going after the best players and from a recruiting ranking standpoint, or was the recruiting rankings trying to follow what Bama and Georgia do? I think there's more to that than anything. For example, in one of the recent rankings, I think it was 247's rankings, might have been Rivals. 21 of Notre Dame's 26 commits saw their rankings drop. Okay, so all of a sudden, after for some strange reason, all these Notre Dame kids dropping their rankings, and that tells me that they're not as good of football players as they were yesterday when their rankings were higher. I just don't put a lot of stock in that. I've said, look, Notre Dame's class yesterday was still better than all but one or two of the classes from 2011 to 2019 that Clemson used to build their championship team. Their highest ranked class during that stretch was seventh, and that was the Trevor Lawrence class. So I just, Mark, you know my stance on this. I don't care about recruiting rankings. They've gotten worse over time because I believe they're geared more towards a business model that is geared towards what can we do to generate the most eyes and interest and things like that. And it's just not something I put a lot of stock into. There are not 5 classes that you could break down right now, in my view, of what makes a good class and tell me that class is better, because I'm going to look at the film, meeting the needs, the fit, and I'm not going to look at a kid that ranks 32nd who happens to be a 5-star and then a kid who's ranked 33rd who's a 4-star and see there's a huge points difference in the way these models are created simply because one guy that's where the cutoff was for 5-star. And yet that's going to have a much bigger impact on it. I mean, there's classes that have a lower overall average grade than Notre Dame that are ranked higher. Why? Because they put such an inflated view on the top 25 to 30 kids for some reason. So all I know is I graded all but one of the kids in Notre Dame's class as a 4-star recruit or higher. That's unprecedented. Notre Dame has this class to me was excellent, and there's not 5 classes I would trade for this class if I was Notre Dame.
Well, it's a flawed system when the rankings are changing on individual players like you have just outlined. And you're not the only one that's brought that to my attention. And then also, again, when there are these artificial cutoffs and drop-offs just because to keep a system in place. So it's a flawed system from that standpoint, where you would think that the system would improve with increased resources and technology. It should be getting better. Brian, when we look at this class, the obvious is to go from the top down because of the impact players are supposed to come from the very talented portion of the ratings and the rankings that we have now bashed. But at the same time, there is some validity to them. But I will give you free reign to pick and choose through this class in regards to your evaluation of who you really like or who may be just an interesting fit for this program and who may splash in season 1.
Well, I think you have to start on offense with this class. And it's kind of funny. You know, we have a phrase at Irish Breakdown. We say, just let it play out, right? We use that phrase all the time. Just be patient. Because back in March, a lot of Notre Dame fans were kind of panicking, like, man, this offensive class is way behind the defensive class. Like, what's happening? Should they fire Tommy Rees and all this other kind of stuff? I'm like, they just hired their staff. Like, just got a brand new staff. How about we hang on for a second? Now you fast forward to signing day, and this is an excellent offensive class. I just put my grades out for the offensive class earlier. I gave it an A-. Because I have a very high standard for an A grade. You know, it has to be really, really special. And this class was really, really special, just slightly off of really being a truly, truly, truly game-changing number 1, number 2 overall offensive haul. And it really starts with the skill players. I mean, I think that's a thing, Mark, when you watch this Notre Dame football team play this year, you know, you look at the things that this group was lacking, right? They were lacking impact quarterback. And that was obvious from the first game of the year, but especially after Tyler Buckner got hurt. They were lacking, in my opinion, sort of the big play type of potential at receiver. Now, some of that is because some of the guys that I felt were impact players were on the bench and should have been playing, and we saw them play later. You know, but outside of Michael Mayer, you didn't see a really dynamic group of players where you go out and you get Kenny Minchie, who's I grade out as a top 100 recruit. SI99 grades out as a top 100 recruit. He's seen his ranking skyrocket. You know, Jeremiah Love is a top 100 recruit. You see him on the board there. He had a monster season at the end, especially at the end. I put in a stat today, Mark, that I think in eight playoff games, he's got over 1,000 yards and 17 rushing touchdowns and over 20 total touchdowns in his career. And he averaged over 11 yards a carry in the playoffs the last 2 years in high school. Really dynamic home run threat. Really popped as a senior. Tall, long, fast, elusive. Can catch the ball out of the backfield. Great player. And then receiver was the biggest need in this class beyond quarterback. And they hit an absolute home run with players like Braylon James, who's a top 100 recruit in my view, Jaden Greathouse, again, who one service ranks in the top 100 and the other 24/7 doesn't even have it in their top 247. So some of these rankings just were a little strange to me this year, but he's one of the most prolific players in the country. had, I think, 3,000-yard seasons during his career, lost one high school football game in his last 3 years, just an outstanding football player. Caleb Smith's a dynamic after-the-catch kind of guy from Texas. And then they got Rico Flores, who also had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons out in Folsom, California, against very good competition. So they got a very balanced receiver class, different types of skilled players. There's the take the top off guy in Braylon James, the sort of the high-volume player in Jaden Greathouse. There's the precision route runner in Rico Flores. And then there's the, hey, throw him a screen, give him a quick ball, and let him go do some stuff in Caleb Smith. And then you've got the home run hitter running back. So they needed a big infusion of offensive playmakers, and they needed a big-time quarterback, and I believe they checked all those boxes with that one, Mark, and got one of the better quarterbacks in a loaded quarterback class, got one of the best running backs in the country, and arguably the best receiver class in the country. That's truly arguable. There's a couple other really good ones, but Notre Dame is absent in that conversation, and they, more than anything else, they needed that on the offensive side of the ball, is an infusion of playmakers, and they got a lot of them.
Brian Driscoll's here from Irish Breakdown. Please check out his work. It's exceptional. Irish Breakdown right here on YouTube. And there you also see the site, irishbreakdown.com. Another batch of analysis coming from Brian and the rest of the guys there. And that's going to be a live show, correct?
Yes, sir. 2:00 Eastern. Yes, sir.
There we go. Just about an hour from now, jump on with the guys here, 2 p.m. Eastern time, right here on YouTube, Irish Breakdown. So that's the overview of why this class could be substantial here in future years toward winning a championship. Of course, Notre Dame, the overarching view or narrative on National Signing Day was, Notre Dame on the actual National Signing Day was a bit of a loser because getting those flips against it, Peyton Bowen being the headliner. Does that concern you in any way in regards to Marcus Freeman and staff not closing on a few guys?
No, because I don't know what else they could have done on that, right? I've reported on why he left. I think that was vindicated yesterday by his decision and how he made it. And he's not even going to go to Oregon. He's going to go to Oklahoma. So it's kind of like sometimes, Mark, you look at him and say, that kid's a really talented player, but that might be a headache that you didn't really want to deal with. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the reality of it. But look, this is the world we live in, and they're going to lose some of those players. But at the end of the day, they never would have been in the game with a Peyton Bowen if it wasn't for Marcus Freeman. They never would have been in the game with a Keon Keeley if Marcus Freeman wasn't the defensive coordinator at the time when Keon Keeley committed. So, the focus can be on what you lost, and that's a very fair thing to focus on, right? It's not unfair to focus on who you lost or who you didn't land. I think that's part of the evaluation of it. But the evaluation at the end of the day needs to be on who'd you get. And at the end of the day, this is an outstanding class. We talked about the offensive class, right? Well, they had an excellent 5-man offensive line class. Harry Heastan completely is remaking his offensive line. They signed a 4-man defensive line class that all 4 of them are ranked as top 200 recruits by at least one service. Now, it wasn't an impact class, which it would have been with Keon, but it's a good class. You have one of the best linebacker classes in the country. Drake Bowen's a top 100 recruit. Jaden Osbury's a top 100 recruit in my view, and then also by others. They're both ranked as top 100 players by at least one service. Preston Zinter used to be a Rivals 250 kid. He's a solid number 3 linebacker. You have 2 corners who are very dynamic. Micah Bell is arguably the fastest recruit in the country. He had the number 5 200-meter dash time in the country last year, not for football players, but in the country. He's a 10-300 kid. Christian Gray's a top 100 recruit. And even though, here's the funny thing, you talk about rankings and why I just laugh at them. Rivals dropped the Don Schuler down to a 3-star this year after a phenomenal senior season. During his senior season, Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia all offered him and tried to flip him from Notre Dame, but they couldn't do it. And yet Rivals views him now as a 3-star recruit. And I'm supposed to take that seriously, right? And then Ben Minich, was a 3-star recruit who bumped up, right? So those are the ones that worked out well for Notre Dame. I had a friend of mine who's an Ohio State fan, actually covers Ohio State. He also does play-by-play. He was at, I think it was St. X. I think it was St. X is when Lakota West was playing St. X in the playoffs. And he calls me, he says, Brian, I called this game, and Ben Minich was the best player in the field. And I was like, really? Like, talk to me about it. So he starts telling me about it. Now, keep in mind, Malik Hartford, who I love, by the way, as a prospect. He's a top 100 guy on my board. Actually, I had him in the top 80 on my rankings. Malik Hartford is on that team and played in that game. But that's the kind of year that Ben Minich had and the kind of player that he's developed into. So they got very good football players. They met all their needs. The only thing that I would say from a needs standpoint this class was lacking is they didn't get like a guy that you view as like that Foskey, Julian Aquara edge rusher type. They didn't get that. Their defensive linemen were kind of the bigger, longer guys. Well, I wish they would have got Keon Keeley. He's my number 1 overall player in the class. He's a tremendous talent. But they have 3 kids from last year's class that are currently playing that edge viper position, which is the edge rushing position. So you got to look at need as well, including 2 kids that ranked as top 100 recruits last year. So it wasn't necessarily a need. It was a want. And, other than that, this is an outstanding class. So people can use whatever rankings they want to go by. When I look at this class, I see a class that hit all of its marks with impact talent, and is a class that met a lot of the needs that this team had going into the offseason.
There's a different evaluation, especially of a first-year head coach right now because of early signing day than there would have been a few years ago. So with Marcus Freeman in play, and I know that you were very supportive and ecstatic. I hope I'm not going overboard with his hiring. When you look at both the season as it played out on the field and then also this recruiting cycle, is there any difference in evaluation of his abilities and leadership of this program?
Not for me, not yet. I think number 1 is you can't overreact to little data, right? So like if he would have gone 11-1 this year, right, or 10-2, let's say they would have beat Marshall and Stanford, would that have guaranteed that he was the guy? I don't think it would have, because he inherited a pretty quality football team, right? So I think you need to allow it to develop. I saw a lot of good things from this program, and a lot of things you say, yep, first-year coach mistakes. Well, that's fine to say and to admit, but if you're a legitimate coach and you're a guy that's going to be successful, I need to see that you've kind of learned from those mistakes on the fly. And we saw that to a degree. After the Stanford game, we talked to several sources that Marcus Freeman sat down with his coaching staff and had some come to Jesus conversations with some of his coaches, right? And then he had some heart to hearts with some of the players on the team. And I'm saying that kind of jokingly because it was pretty stern. Let him know, like, look, we're going to do things my way. Okay. And I've let you guys kind of do things a certain way, and that's going to change. So I think Coach Freeman came in, and he's like, he wanted to be a coach's coach. People say he's a player's coach. He's not, he's a coach's coach. And he had this thing where every assistant is the head coach of his room. And I think at times maybe he gave them a little bit too much room to go do things, because most young assistants, when they become head coaches, do things the way that they wish it would have been done when they were an assistant coach.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not every assistant coach is like you, right? You have to do more to set the standard. And I think he kind of laid that down. And I think that's why we saw Notre Dame finish the season the way that they did, winning 5 of their last 6 games and playing good football down the stretch, thumping Clemson, thumping Boston College down the stretch. And so it was a learning process, which we thought there was a few more bumps in the road than I anticipated. Like in under no circumstances did I anticipate losing to Marshall, nor will I ever justify it or excuse it or say, no, it's okay. It's not. There's no excuse for it. But they bounced back. And I think that's the thing too, Mark, is how do you handle those losses? How do you handle those kind of defeats? And when you look at what Notre Dame did after those losses, they bounced back and played good football after each of them. And I think that's a very important part to evaluate a coach. Now it's about, okay, now don't make those mistakes again and take this program to the next level.
So I don't get the opportunity that I would like to hear as much of your analysis as I would like to again, but just consider it a compliment that I dip into a few post-game shows from time to time for a few minutes, because I don't basically listen to anybody out there. I just don't have the time, number one. Number two, there's not enough people out there that I respect or feel that deserve the time, but certainly you and your guys do on these post-game shows. And for as complimentary as I know that you are concerning the overall direction, I would dip into those post-game shows, and and I don't want to take a small sample and blow it out of proportion. You usually had some issues with play calling or use of personnel, specifically on offense, but on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, there were. I think the coordinating at times this year was one of the things I had the biggest problem with. You kind of look back and say, like those shows are they're a raw kind of immediate reaction to what we saw. And I thought at times this year, like we can do two things, right? Right, Mark. Here's where I'm going to get to. Like, number one is I can understand the shortcomings you feel you have that are leading you to calling a game the way that you did, right? So Tommy Rees felt handcuffed by having Drew Pine at quarterback, and I think he was. My issues were more of, if that were true, then this is what I think you should have done, right? And that's kind of where those reactions come from. Is you can't go out there and do what you did to Clemson and think you can just repeat that week after week after week.
Mhm.
That worked that day. I don't know if it works that way again if you play Clemson a week later. That's the thing about football, is there's this thought of, well, if you do something one way, you can just do that every single week. I mean, we saw that a couple years ago, right? Notre Dame goes out and plays Clemson at home. They don't have Trevor Lawrence. They don't have Tyler Davis. They don't have Mike Jones. And Notre Dame does some things that worked really well. They were able to move the ball on that Clemson defense. They were able to hit some home runs in the run game, throw the ball down the field. Well, they tried to regurgitate that same game plan a couple weeks later in the ACC championship game. It didn't work out very well, right? And it's just one of those things where you have to be able to adapt and adjust. And when you do something well, know that opponents are going to start preparing for that. And I don't think at times they necessarily did that. But you also saw some positives throughout the year. I actually had more issues with the defense than I did the offense this year, to be completely honest with you, Mark, because I feel like defensively, a lot of what they did was just they got away with certain things because they have a lot of talent on defense. And the linebacker play regressed. That was concerning for me. And they kept throwing the same guys out there week after week after week, which was problematic to me. And it just reminded me a lot of what we saw during a stretch with a defensive coordinator I'm not overly fond of, and whose name I don't even want to mention at this point in time because I want to be in a good mood today. But you just kind of felt like, boy, they're just not really playing to their full potential. And they don't have the excuse of no starting quarterback and you're missing this guy and you're missing that guy, like the offense could maybe point to and use an excuse. And so I think those are things that you look at and said, I just don't really feel like this team got the most out of who they are, because I felt it far too often this year. The coaching staff was trying to make it be about them and their scheme and their play calling, as opposed to letting the players play. And this is where I'll give Michigan a lot of credit this year. And this isn't meant to be an insult, but you look at Michigan and you say, what Jim Harbaugh has done the last 2 years is, we're going to stop focusing so much on trying to out coach everybody from a scheme standpoint, right? Don Brown, some things they've done in the past, and we're going to teach our kids how to play this game at an exceptionally high level and at a very physical level. So if you break Michigan down, Mark, they're not an incredibly advanced team from, oh, look at all the schemes and the crazy blitzes that they're bringing, but they are as fundamentally sound of a team as you're going to find, and they're as physical of a team as you're going to find, because Jim Harbaugh said, we're going to make it about the kids. And we're not going to make it about us showing how smart we are. Now, they do some stuff schematically, and that's all great. And they design some really nice plays to create some big play opportunities against Michigan. You got a scheme, right? And that's running ISO all day, but we're really good at running ISO. But my point is, it was about, we're going to get the most out of these kids, and then we'll kind of scheme to fit what they do best, as opposed to, let me go show everybody how smart I am. Ryan Day's considered this wizard offensive mind, right? He has gotten his butt whooped now 2 years in a row by two young coordinators. First, it was McDonald last year, embarrassed him. And then this year, Jesse Minter just coached circles around him, right? Why? Because Michigan was tougher. They were fundamentally sound. They were in position every time where they need to be. They didn't have better players, Mark, right? I think even Michigan fans would admit that. Their talent is not on the same level as Ohio State's, but their kids play the game better. Their kids play more physical. Their kids are always in position. They don't make those big, dumb mistakes that had been costing Michigan at other times. And that's been the reason, I think, for a lot of their success. And I think Notre Dame needs to kind of take a page from that. And I think we're going to see them transition to that, because they started to do that later in the season. And when they did, their play started looking better.
Where do you stand on bowl season, bowl games? Do you get excited for them? Do you watch them?
Yes and no. I kind of, leading up to signing day, I record them all, on YouTube TV, because I just don't have time to watch them. But these next few days, I'll watch a bunch of them. I wish they would do it different. I love bowls. I love bowl season. I just don't love how they do it. I feel like we get a lot of the same kind of matchups every year, because I don't love the the deep tie-ins. So every year we're getting some ACC SEC matchup, and it's like SEC 3 versus ACC 5, and then we wonder why it's a blowout every year. And so I don't love the matchups, but I'm a big proponent of bowl season, Mark. You know that I have said the right way to do expanding the playoffs is to do it through the bowl season, to do it through the bowls, get back to the traditional, conference tie-ins with the bowls, let them play it out, and then pick your 2 or 4 from bowl season as opposed to a 12-team playoff. Because I love bowl season, and I think it's good for the players. I think it's good for team development. You get that extra 15, practice period. It's just odd to me that the company that airs most of the games is the one constantly talking about how they don't matter, which is odd to me, but whatever. They're going to do what they're going to do.
So, Brian, you are the perfect person to ask this question to, because most of my guests obviously cover teams that play in conferences. So once Notre Dame's been removed from national championship contention, they're playing a strong schedule against name brand opponents. And now they play a bowl game against the South Carolina team in the Gator Bowl. So how much will you weight this? How much, whether that's intellectually or emotionally, will you be invested in this game versus the USC game, the North Carolina game, the Clemson game, et cetera?
I think bowl games can sometimes be overstated in importance in looking at projecting a team for next year. That's the mistake I think people make. Because a team looked good in this bowl game, that means we're going to rank them high next year for whatever reason. I think that's a bad way to look at bowl games. I think bowl games are very important, Mark. And this game for Notre Dame is very important. But the importance comes from other things. I'm a big believer in momentum. I believe momentum comes from confidence. I think confidence breeds a high level of execution. That high level of execution leads to momentum. That's what momentum is to me. And I think bowl games can do a lot for that. And we've seen this with Notre Dame. I mean, you look at 2014, Notre Dame loses, I think, their last 4 regular season games. They climbed up all the way to number 5 at one point in time when they went and played Florida State. Went out and beat Navy the next week. They're 7-1. They took the defending champs down to the wire and all, and then just utter collapse down the stretch. Lost to Northwestern at home, lost to Louisville, lost to Arizona State, lost at the end of the year to USC. And USC beat them, I think, 49-14. It could have been worse. Steve Sarkisian called off the dogs in that game. I mean, they went on like a 19-play drive that took like 10 minutes off the clock. He could have scored 70 if he wanted to in that game. And that team had no momentum. And then they go into the bowl game. They make some personnel changes. They do things differently. And they go out and beat, a mediocre LSU team. But it wasn't beating LSU per se that did it. It was the fact that nobody thought they could win that game. They went out, they changed their style. They went to be more of a physical power running team. They put Malik Zaire in a quarterback. They put Mike McGlinchey in an offensive line. They made some changes, and they went out and won that game. So it wasn't the taste of the collapse in November that they had in their mouths. It was, look what we can do when we play our game, and they were able to build on that. And then a year later, they go 10-3. They are in the top 4 of the college football playoff rankings in November. And then what happens? They lose 3 of their last 4 games. Or no, excuse me, 2 of their last 3 games, right? And then they lost to because they were in 2015 they were lost to Clemson, and then they lost to Stanford down the stretch, and then they lost to Ohio State in the bowl game. And all of a sudden you go into the offseason kind of not feeling great about yourselves. Way better team, way better season, but because you lost your last 2 games, you just as a team didn't have that same momentum. And I think those are things that I believe can impact the football team. Is from that standpoint, it doesn't mean that we're going to go out and because if Notre Dame beat South Carolina because they beat them and the offense does this and the defense does this, that means Notre Dame should be ranked over here next year. I don't think that has anything to do with it. But as far as team building and getting young players the opportunity, kind of getting a glimpse of Michael Mayer's not going to be here, right? He's not playing in the game. So this is your first taste of, what your tight end group is going to look like to a degree. And I think those things matter much more so than how I'm going to view next year's team based on the bowl result. It's more of, are you doing things that give your team some momentum to build on going into the offseason?
So that said, what is important for you to see out of Notre Dame against South Carolina?
I want to see Tyler Buchner play well. I mean, I think this offense needs to get going. This offense, I kind of look at it, Mark, and it's about, I want to see this offense start to look like it needs to. Look, I understand, agree to disagree, but I understand why they did what they did. 13 personnel, run the ball all the time. They were just trying to get out of the season with as many wins as possible. And they felt that they could build around the line and the tight end. I want to see them push the ball down the field more. I want to see them get the ball to the perimeter more. I want to see them be a team that can rip off big plays and be a bit more explosive offensively. I know they're not going to all of a sudden look like 2019 LSU in the bowl game, but I at least want to see the starting foundation of that. I think that's the thing holding this team back. I was disappointed in the season on defense, but it's compared to what they have been. It was still a pretty good defense, but just compared to what they have been and what they could be, my expectations are it's still the offense holding this program back. And I want to start to see this team take some of those strides. I want to see Coach Reese start to take some of those strides and go into next season really feeling good about what this football team is going to be.
Okay, folks, be back here at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We got Steve Dace from Michigan Podcast. We're going to go live. Be at Irish Breakdown in just about an hour, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, with Brian and the rest of the staff breaking down the National Signing Day. And you got to catch what they posted yesterday from National Signing Day with players, with their families, and a lot of great stories being told there. So you get the human side, the narratives, the storylines from yesterday, the nuts and bolts breakdown today, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Irish Breakdown. Brian, I know you're running a million miles an hour all over the place, so thanks for making time for us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Mark.